Hey, good morning, and welcome to today's episode of Forging the Sword. We're blessed to have Colonel Jim Armstrong, the commander of the 1st Brigade, 3rd Infantry Division, the Raider Brigade, who just finished their rotation at JMRC. And I'm Colonel C.J. Kirkpatrick, the commander of Ops Group here at JMRC. So, Jim, just finished the rotation. How are we feeling?
Rested. Now
Good.
rested. Thanks for giving us the opportunity to talk, CJ. Appreciate it, and to share some of the lessons. Great rotation. Super challenging. Nothing beats fighting at JMRC in the complex terrain as an ABCT.
Great. So, Jim, I know, Raider Brigade is over here as a rotational assigned force. So you're over here doing real-world operations in support of USRAF and the theater. But specifically, what was Raider Brigade coming to JMRC? What were you guys trying to accomplish here?
So I think three things really. Number one, first and foremost, is to be good at executing the fundamentals. Right?
Always, yeah.
Nothing else is going to matter if we don't get those right. So first and foremost, execute the fundamentals well. The second thing was to become more lethal and more survivable, which is, I think, the challenge that is posed to us from the Army right now.
Absolutely.
No matter where we're going to fight and when we're going to fight. Mm-hmm. And the last one was to be able to inform the Army and the armored force on the transformation and contact efforts, and so we endeavored to share our lessons and what we've learned with both 3rd Infantry Division and Sparta as they continue some of these efforts. Looking forward to their training, but also to pipe lessons back into 1-1 Cav as the other TIC 2.0 brigade, and make sure that that they're pursuing things that are informed by our successes and failures.
Sure. No, I mean, the circle of dialogue that's happening, it's been happening in the Army, really picking up pace with armored brigades, and awesome to see Raider kind of leading the charge. But tell me a little more about kind of your perception of transformation and contact from a Raider perspective, because the Army did not help you, and no offense to the Army, but the Army didn't help you. Like, Raider Brigade and the Marne Division kind of figured this out on their own. So can you talk to me a little bit about how that came to be and how you developed that culture?
Sure. I think it was definitely more than a mindset than a fielding, right? It shouldn't. I don't think it should be looked at as okay, I'm a TIC 2.0. What's my fielding schedule? It is what we were focused on doing was solving tactical problems, and training in operationally relevant environments, right? What we looked at is just doing those two things, and those two things led to doing things differently, right? And so, if the problem is the enemy is jamming us and preventing communications, then let's go after a solution, but either a technique or concept or a capability or both, or an organizational way of solving that tactical problem. And some of those things led to different organizations, and some lead to a new widget. But if it wasn't going to solve one of those problems, one of our tactical problems in an ABCT to fight and win, then we weren't going to spend time on it. And so it wasn't just a Chinese menu of widgets. It was about starting with the problems and figuring out how to solve them. So solving tactical problems was most on our mind.
Right.
And the Marne Innovation Center and 3ID, the Innovation Center really helped us reach out to people who might have possible solutions, and provided a space for us to prototype in. Those were the two biggest pieces that the Marne Innovation Center helped us with. The rest of it was fantastic, soldiers and leaders taking that solve a problem, have a mindset of moving out, and a mindset of, hey, this may not work. And so you don't have to get it right the first time.
Right.
And I think some of us are slow to put something together because we don't want it to fail. In our business, failure typically means lives lost. And so I understand why there's that hesitancy. But in this case, what we really need to do is just get an iteration under our belt so we can learn faster, And so once you put the solving tactical problems with a, you know, a desire to get started, those two things came together at the lower echelons and really got us moving forward.
Yeah, and I mean, I love the way you put it, Jim, because I think you know the wrong attitude is I'm going to bring a solution in search of a problem. That wasn't what I saw from Raider. That's absolutely not what you just described. And that culture of innovation of we know these are tactical problems that we struggle with on the modern battlefield. What's the best way to solve them? And I heard you use words like we're going to make contact with robots first and stuff, but it wasn't about the robot. It was about finding better ways, more lethal ways, more survivable ways to defeat the enemy. So I think that's great the way you put it. I think there is a danger in the Army sometimes. We get enamored with the tech that we think we can create a solution and then find the problem to apply it against. Not the attitude we saw out here. Speaking of, like, so broadly, we talked a little bit about EW, and I know you brought 2 EW platoons here. Broadly speaking, though, what were some of the new ways you were trying to solve these technical problems, and how did you use some technology to innovate towards those solutions?
Sure. I'll start out with the EW platoons. So the problem that I think we were trying to solve was we know that we need to, that the enemy is competing in the electromagnetic spectrum, and that at the brigade and below level, we don't have the tools to enable commanders to see themselves and see the enemy and then act in that domain, right? So we expect them to have an advantage and compete and win with the adversary that is in that, but we're not giving them the tools to be able to see themselves and then do something about it. And so, you know, that's the problem we were trying to solve. Create an extra EW platoon. I put that at our, you know, one of our infantry battalions and kept it at the battalion level in order to try to help that. We were fortunate enough to have both those platoons participate in Spectrum Blitz here at JMRC. We really appreciate you doing that. They would not have been at even the fundamental level, right? Speaking about the fundamentals, but you know, just like we train our FIST teams ahead of the maneuver team and integrate a trained FIST team into maneuver, right? Spectrum Blitz was really the only thing I've ever seen to get a bunch of EW platoons from across the brigades in Europe and compete against each other in that space and get them baselined on a lot of things. So super helpful. Really appreciate that exercise and would recommend it to anybody.
And before you go on, Jim, I think the Spectrum Blitz was to scratch that itch in Europe, but I think it's a fundamental question the Army has to answer too. Like, how do you home station-wise develop, I call it EW Foundry, or something where they can have a competitive space where they can kind of fight in a fourth dimension. I think we've got some challenges in the Army with spectrum management, some other things. We're a little arrogant in our approach to some of this, but concur that we've got to find spaces, and it's not just the specialists, right? It's the knuckle draggers like you and I. Like, we've got to think at a higher level about a dimension we're just not comfortable with. Absolutely,
and the more we can translate that space to a maneuver commander discussion, the better. That's why, to maneuver in the physical space, we had to see ourselves, see the enemy, and then, put ourselves in a position of advantage relative to that. And so I think it's the same thing for the EMS. See yourself, see the enemy, get in a position of advantage.
Absolutely.
Spend a lot of time looking at ourselves with our EW tools and having our EW folks brief commanders what they look like. Spend a lot of time having and these are things that are more than the widget, right? It's the way we're tackling our analysis and thinking about things. We're briefing the spectrum as a part of the enemy sit, right? The enemy, just like we say, hey, in terrain, here's the McCoo and the obstacles. We say, here's where the enemy can block us in the spectrum. Here's where we can go and still have freedom of maneuver. And so we can proactively move amongst our pace relative to the enemy instead of just picking up a hand mic and saying, oh, that doesn't work anymore, I guess. It's also a great example where we had some failure. We had a system called the Morning Star that was, an antenna with a Kraken SDR and a Raspberry Pi that we thought was going to give us some real-time feedback to see in the spectrum, see the enemy in the spectrum real-time, linked with EWPMT, which is more a planning tool. We thought we had that figured out. We brought it to Spectrum Blitz. It didn't work as great as we thought. We're going to go back and iterate and see if we can improve it, but it just didn't give us the fidelity that made it worth the setup. We ended up disaggregating that and using the Raspberry Pis and Krakens in a different way. But some of that stuff just isn't going to work.
Yeah, but I love the attitude and it's, not just Jim Armstrong, right? It goes all the way down to the lowest level with our 17s. Like that particular thing, it wasn't talked about as this didn't work or this failed. It was that, hey man, this is a really good idea. We need to adjust how we execute this idea and let's try it again.
Absolutely. Yep. So the EW. EW did well. C2. So what we tried to do is stop with the trade-off of effective C2 or survivability, and instead try to develop something that that had less trade space, I guess. I mean, I still think it's trade space, but and I think it went well at the brigade level. Look, our because it wasn't fielded by the Army as an integrated system, we achieved a resilient network mostly through redundancy and not through any kind of self-healing. That wasn't what we were able to do, and it created some challenges that we leaned on leadership to blast through some silos that those kind of stovepiped walls put up. But what it did do was we got off of line of sight comms at the brigade level, which allowed me to put the brigade CP in places that, now the enemy's looking, and instead of doing a terrain analysis saying, here are the 3 hilltops he's got to be on, it's, hey, you got to find every 10 by 7 meter space that I'm getting a satellite shot in. And so we were able to hide the CP well. And then I also think we took a pretty good approach to jumping the CP. We've been trying to get smaller for a while, and everybody's got some ideas on that. But we did things like on our CP jump, we said, hey, we're either going to execute at night, or the next day we did a reconnaissance in the next site, and then we said, hey, we're going to move out in 4 different serials, and each serial is going to take a different route. And we're going to do it at the same time that our LRPs are happening, so there's a lot of traffic on the road. And so I think it is, a one-step level, over, hey, we need to get really small, and I'm going to time you, right? Well, it may take me a little more time to do the jump, but I'm going to do it in a way that's evading, starting with the red pen. How's the enemy going to find me, and how do we circumvent that?
Just to interrupt you again, I do appreciate for the Raider Brigade. The conversation in the Army about getting smaller, right? There's an event horizon where, once you get so small, maybe you're not a command post anymore, right? If you're not doing the 6 functions of attack and those things, then I'm not sure what it is at that point, right? So you found the balance where it was still a functioning headquarters that could do those 6 things we expect talks to do, but was small, survivable. The thought process of that, we can't jump, and rehearsals was another example, right? That the story that we can't rehearse in the daylight. I think the Raider Brigade showed you can. Everything's harder, right? But it requires a little more thought, a little more creativity, a little more synchronization. But all these things are achievable. And we still had a functioning talk that was small, survivable, difficult to find, but still functional and able to fight the fight.
Yeah, and I think the C2 discussion and the EW are linked in that, we had Chimera, we had Star Shield, we had a thing called Sling Blade, we had all kinds of things. Some of them I thought were made up. But and so if somebody were to ask, is that the answer? I would say no. Back to the maneuvering in the EMS, the answer is understanding what the enemy can see and how they're targeting it and where we can have freedom of maneuver and being able to move between those based on the changing environment. So the answer may be Star Shield right now, but next week it may not be based on some way of targeting it. Yeah. So to me, it's that mindset of being able to maneuver it in that spectrum and get commanders the tools to see themselves, so that we can do what we do best in understanding when we transition from movement to maneuver and changing formations, but do that in the spectrum, considering our pace and our C2 structure as a part of that.
Yeah, and I think, Jim, so JMRC gets to see basically every flavor of brigade in the Army. I think you're driving forward the conversation for the Armor Branch, or the ABCT in particular, who frankly is a little behind some of the other thoughts that are going on in the Army. I think you and I talked during the rotation that unfortunately, the platoon leader Armstrong and Kirkpatrick basically recognize the C2 systems that are at the tactical edge. It hasn't changed much. The radios are smaller. we call it a JBCP instead of a Blue Force Tracker or something, but it hasn't fundamentally changed. I think you guys are have some great initial data points and conversation about how the Armor Force needs to rethink how we do C2.
Yeah, no, I think we had a bit of a dog's breakfast of it, but I think it was enough. It was definitely an increase in scale from what we did at our National Training Center rotation, and I think we scaled it enough to see some things that worked and didn't work. And I'm excited for 2-3-ID, 1-1 Cav, Raider itself to say, okay, this thing has some potential. This piece, let's go after that one next at a broader scale.
Okay, so we talked a little bit Mission Command, EW. The other thing was really mainly small, short range UAS, but brought some capability here both to sense and be lethal. Tell us a little more about that.
Sure. So we brought a larger volume than we had at NTC. NTC we had about 90 total. A lot of that was the little Black Hornets, soldier-borne sensor, and the rest were Paradenofi and Skydio. We brought a lot more volume of the more quality the Parrots and Skydios. We had some tethered as well, so we had a good breadth of short range only. And then we had some of our own 3D printed first-person viewer, one-way attack. We had the simulated munitions there on it. We're looking forward to moving that to a live shoot. We've benefited a lot from being in Europe, right, and working with 2CR 173rd and some of the other folks in theater that really accelerated that process. We stood up our about 5 3D printers that have been working to make those. Came to the rotation with 47 printed FPVs and 4 teams that we created with those. What we found, number one is, the brigade really has got to have something beyond SRR, which, I don't think that there's an issue that recognizing that, but there's nothing to field right now.
Absolutely.
So that's number one. Number two, we've learned a lot of good lessons with airspace management and the ability to make sure that we have permissive use of a UAS, and that most of our UAS ought to be viewed as Class 5. They're one-way things,
right,
that may or may not survive that flight, and therefore we got to look more of it's not a small helicopter. It's a mortar round that you can steer.
Absolutely.
And so the more we think about our graphic control measures in that way, and our battle space in that way, and the airspace in that way, if you wouldn't have to shut down the air to shoot a 203 grenade launcher
100%.
or a mortar round, we ought to just apply that same logic.
Yeah, and I think, Jim, that's something we've talked about a little bit through the rotation, but the Army's got some work to do, right? Because if I go read the doctrine, it still tells me I'm supposed to do ROSs and all these other things, and I think consistently we see at the CTC, and I saw very well from your brigade that needs to go in the trash can, as you're talking about. Like, we've got to rethink what airspace means and what echelon and how we manage it to truly have integrated airspace. And all the old tools the Army gave us, fundamentally not useful anymore.
And certainly from a offense and defense perspective, the ABCT's pace on an offense is just, it's hard to stop and launch.
Yeah. Tempo's a thing.
Tempo's a thing, and when you create that advantage, the conditions you need to really then, use the increased speed to get inside the enemy's cycle, you don't want to stop and throw a UAS up.
Right.
We did have a tethered that will launch off AMV as you're driving. The good thing about the tethered, impervious to EW, to jamming. The bad thing is everybody sees that there's a tether.
It's TRP,
So, pluses and minuses there. But we struggled to launch UAS and find that balance of making contact with an unmanned system first at the SRR level while still maintaining the pace we need to. We could do it at some points of the operation, but in others, once we started, really increasing the speed, that was hard. The defense absolutely, kind of flipped that on its head, and we were able to what I'm excited about is we were able to establish these small teams on key pieces of terrain that had our FPV teams, a forward observer with increased, TLE reducing equipment, and AT teams, and that mix could really create effects on the enemy that punched way above its weight of people. And so that I'm excited about that, and how do we get that capability on the offense maybe, or put it in key places, like maybe a support by fire as a part of suppression for a breach. That can help us.
No, awesome. And back to your opening, I think when you were talking about focus on the fundamentals. I mean, I think your defense here was like the perfect vignette of the lethal UAS capability you built was decisive in preventing the assault force from penetrating your defense, and then simultaneously back to the basics. We had a tank crew who was just absolutely lethal, bore sight every day, ready to fight. The basic fundamental stuff killed the exploitation force. So the old and new, back to your point of, it's not necessarily about the technology. It's about thinking how to solve the same tactical problems in new ways in multiple dimensions. And great example.
And we were very cognizant that, hey, if we're not good at the fundamentals, but we have a bunch of drones, we're just going to be a unit that's not good with drones.
Roger
right?
that.
And so a lot of effort on that from the chain of command on down to our soldiers, and we appreciate their effort. We saw it pay dividends.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I know, Jim, you guys also brought some counter UAS capability. Before you start talking about it a little bit, it was interesting. Really, I was fascinated to watch the brigade work through the thought process and really invest the energy in that as both a protection warfighting function capability, particularly over the breach. Like, we were very focused on how we could prevent the enemy from affecting that, both decisive for us, but also critical vulnerability at the same time. And then the integration across the battlefield. You had a mix of systems as opposed to the one ring to rule them all approach. Tell us a little more about how you guys kind of came to what you have, and then how you thought through how to use it counter UAS.
Yeah, and I think, look, this is where I think most of the new technology pieces have been not in our ABCTs, and this is where I think ABCTs offer the most rich environment for folks to test new things, because our size, weight, and power constraints aren't as bad, and so you can really open the performance envelope of something up. Our ability to charge things with power generation isn't as bad of a constraint, right? And so and we have everything from an infantry squad who does have those issues, right, to a Amazon warehouse in the field, which is our SSA, right, who needs point defense type stuff, right? So we have the things that the Army is finding in places like forward deployed and CENTCOM that work. We need some of those. The things that the 101st is using, we need some of those. And so it's a layered approach,
right.
And I really think that's what the ABCT provides that's unique to others, and I think we need to really generate those opportunities better.
Yeah, I think you got the great first chapter of that story, the way you guys had kind of multiple systems that were able to plug in different ways in the BCT, and I agree. I mean, what a great opportunity to test stuff. I mean, you can always optimize later battery weight and all that stuff, but if you just want to see how it works, ABCT is going to give you the place where you can plug it in.
And what we learned from it, back to, again, the concepts versus the widget, right, is what does our PPL look like? What does our prioritized protection list look like? And how do we allocate those things? And who's making those decisions within the staff? And then we learned the age-old fundamental things of when you change a task organization, did somebody make link up with it? Is the trained person there? Right, and we fought through all those challenges just the way you would when you pass an engineer over with a dig asset.
Yeah, and the fascinating challenge of it's an age-old challenge, right? When you assign additional responsibilities to members of squad, right? When you lose your drone buster guy, when you lose your certain kind of counter UAS guy or your one FPV pilot, like that becomes just an additional level of complexity leaders have to think through.
Yeah, absolutely, and I am excited about the counter UAS space. I know that it's been a challenge. I think it's not just an ABCT challenge. It is a survivability challenge for everybody.
Absolutely.
But I do think that, it isn't just one silver bullet. It's going to have to be a layer. But I think a lot of the layers are there. We just need to stitch them together and connect them to, a visualization for the commander, capability. And I think we'll be pretty close.
Absolutely. Well, Jim, I find this conversation fascinating. We could probably go on for hours, but I don't think anybody's going to watch for hours. So I'm gonna wrap this up by asking, I guess, kind of, as a seasoned senior brigade commander who had the good fortune of going to 2 CTC rotations. I'm jealous, but got 2 CTC rotations. Any advice for brigade commanders, I guess, coming to Europe, or ABCT commanders, or any brigade commander or organization coming to JMRC? Any thoughts or advice for them as you reflect on your work here as Raider 6?
Sure. I'd say start on day one. It's a great thing to hang your hat on and orient your team on a specific problem.
Yeah.
So start with the red pen and start on day one and start solving that tactical problem.
Great.
How am I going to increase my lethality and survivability against Warrior, against Black Horse? And that will drive. Look, I trust that our CTCs are providing operationally relevant conditions and enemy forces for us to train against. So are we paying attention to everything else, our adversaries? Absolutely, and we're working towards that. But if the more specific you can be about the red pen,
Right.
the more those specific those problems become, and you can get after solutions instead of just planning about things and having PowerPoint slides about things. And then the second one would be, just to echo, to say again, is just get started. One of the things that we did, for example, was a stress shoot, which is somewhere after a table 6 and before a collective live fire. And I had no idea what that was going to look like. And General Norrie said, I want you to kind of do something like this. And the first one was terrible. And the second one was a little better. And the third one was a little better. And so, in a lot of these things that we're doing, I don't think that the concept is going to be out there and we're just waiting to implement it correctly. And the capability, there's a mix of them. And the organizational framework around it, there's some ideas. But if we think that any one of those things is going to lead the other 3, it's got to be a mutually informing journey.
Which we only get through ruthless repetition.
Right.
You got to do it.
So
do it.
So I would say, start with the red pen and just start doing it.
It's age old, right? How do you get better at push-ups? Do push-ups.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So that's if I had to do 3, because I guess everybody wants 3 things. Fundamentals.
3 bullets. Okay, fundamentals.
Yep.
Stay focused on the fundamentals. Okay. Well, hey, Jim, it's been a pleasure being on your team as we prepped for and did this rotation. Raiders just a great learning organization. Really enjoyed our time together. And for the audience, I hope you enjoyed the conversation. We'll see you next time on Forging the Sword.